Think about the last time you made a decision entirely on your own. No Google search, no app recommendation, no feed telling you what to feel. Can you actually remember it? Because here is the quiet, uncomfortable truth that almost no one is willing to say out loud. You may not be thinking as freely as you believe you are. And what is slowly replacing your thinking does not announce itself. It does not ask permission. It simply arrives one small convenience at a time until one day the part of you that used to wrestle with hard questions stops wrestling. This video is not about robots. It is not about science fiction. It is about something far more personal. It is about your mind and what is quietly happening inside it right now. Stay with me, because what I am about to share with you does not come from paranoia or conspiracy. It comes from patterns, real patterns, psychological ones that researchers have been watching quietly for years while most of the world kept scrolling. By the end of this, you will understand something about modern life that most people sense but can never quite name. Something that explains why you feel mentally exhausted without doing much, why you forget things faster than you used to, why making simple decisions sometimes feels strangely difficult. There is a reason for all of it, and once you see it clearly, you will never be able to unsee it. We are living through one of the most significant cognitive shifts in human history, and it is happening so gradually, so comfortably, that the majority of people are not even aware it is a shift at all. Artificial intelligence, algorithms, and automated systems have woven themselves into the texture of daily American life, not as tools we consciously reach for, but as invisible infrastructure, the air we breathe inside the digital world. You wake up and your phone has already sorted your notifications by what it predicts you care about. You open a streaming app and the choices have been narrowed for you before you even begin choosing. You type a few words into a search bar, and the system finishes your sentence, shapes your query, and returns results ranked not by objective truth, but by what the algorithm has decided you are most likely to engage with. This is not neutral. None of it is neutral. And psychology tells us something deeply important here. The environment we think inside shapes the thoughts we are capable of having. Change the environment, and you do not just change what people think. Over time, you change how they think. That is what we need to talk about. Most people, when they hear the phrase artificial intelligence, picture something dramatic, a robot, a supercomputer, a moment of conflict. But the real story of AI and human cognition is far quieter than that. It does not look like a battle. It looks like comfort. It looks like the GPS voice that reroutes you before you even notice you are lost. It looks like the email app that suggests how to end your message before you have finished your thought. It looks like the news feed that has learned, with unsettling precision, exactly which kinds of stories make your pulse quicken and your eyes stay fixed to the screen. Psychology suggests that human beings are creatures of least resistance. When a system makes a task easier, we naturally offload that task to the system. This is not laziness. It is efficiency. For most of human history, offloading effort was a survival advantage. But there is a difference between offloading physical labor and offloading cognitive labor. When you outsource the carrying of heavy things, your arms rest. When you outsource the doing of heavy thinking, your mind does too. And a mind that stops exercising a muscle does not just rest. It begins to lose the muscle entirely. Here is where it starts to get unsettling. There is a concept in cognitive science called cognitive offloading. It refers to the way human beings use the external world to reduce the burden on internal mental processes. Writing a note to remember something, drawing a map to navigate, using a calculator instead of mental arithmetic. For centuries, this was a minor phenomenon. The tools were limited. They helped with specific bounded tasks. But today, the tools are not limited. They are everywhere. They are learning, and they are not just helping with specific tasks anymore. They are beginning to handle the full architecture of how people process information, make decisions, form opinions, and understand the world. Think about what a recommendation algorithm actually does. It does not just suggest a movie. It curates reality. It decides, based on your behavioral history, what slice of the world's content you will encounter today. It filters the possible down to the probable. And it does this so smoothly, so continuously, that most people genuinely cannot tell the difference between what they chose and what was chosen for them. Have you ever noticed how two people can use the same platform for a year and end up with completely different pictures of reality? Same app, same country, entirely different worlds. That is not an accident, that is design. Most people never notice this part. The erosion of independent thinking does not happen in a single moment. It happens through repetition, through small delegations of thought, one after another, until the habit of delegating becomes the default. Think about directions. A generation ago, if you wanted to get somewhere new in an American city, you had to build a mental map. You had to pay attention to street names, landmarks, cardinal directions. You had to hold spatial information in your mind and update it in real time. This was mentally demanding, but it also built something. People who navigated this way tended to develop strong spatial reasoning. They understood the structure of their environment. They were oriented. Now, research has shown that people who rely heavily on GPS navigation show measurable reductions in the brain regions associated with spatial memory. The hippocampus, a structure critical to memory and navigation, appears to become less active in heavy GPS users during navigation tasks. This is documented, published, peer-reviewed. The brain is adaptive. It strengthens what it uses and allows what it does not use to weaken. This is called neuroplasticity, and it works in both directions. Growth and atrophy. Use it or lose it. Now apply that same logic not just to navigation, but to reasoning, to forming opinions, to sitting with uncertainty long enough to think through a difficult question. What happens to those mental capacities when they too are quietly, systematically outsourced? But this is only the beginning. Because the GPS story is relatively innocent, navigation is a specific skill. Losing it has a bounded impact. The story gets considerably darker when we move from navigation to belief, from getting somewhere to deciding what is true. This is where modern AI influence operates at a scale most people have never fully confronted. Consider how most Americans now encounter news and information. It is not through independent searching. It is not through deliberate, chosen reading of multiple perspectives. For the majority of people, information arrives through social feeds, through recommendation engines, through systems that have been engineered with extraordinary sophistication to capture and hold human attention. And here is the dark psychology at the core of this. Attention systems do not optimize for truth. They optimize for engagement. And the content that drives the most engagement, research has shown again and again, is content that triggers emotion. Specifically, content that triggers fear, outrage, moral disgust, or tribal identity. This means that the more you use these systems, the more your information environment fills with content designed to destabilize, to agitate, to create a constant low-grade sense of crisis that keeps you coming back for the next update. You are not being informed, you are being stimulated. And a mind that is continuously stimulated is a mind that is never quiet enough to think. The philosopher Pascal wrote, several centuries before the internet existed, that all of humanity's problems stem from the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. He could not have imagined how right he was going to become. Here is where it gets darker. The manipulation of attention is not a side effect of these systems. In many cases, it is the product. There is a term used in technology circles: engagement metrics, time on platform, click-through rate. These are the numbers that drive the decisions behind what you see, what gets amplified, what gets buried. When an algorithm is trained to maximize these numbers, it does not make moral judgments about the content it promotes. It simply observes what keeps people watching and shows them more of it. Psychology suggests that human beings have deep, evolutionary drives that make certain content almost impossible to ignore. Threat detection, social comparison, the need for status and belonging, the discomfort of unresolved questions. These are ancient instincts. They evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to help human beings survive in small tribes on the African savanna. They were not designed for a world in which a machine can access them at will, 100 times a day, calibrated to your specific psychological profile, for the purpose of keeping your eyes on a screen. The mismatch between our ancient psychological wiring and modern engineered environments is one of the most underappreciated crises of our time. You are not scrolling because you want to. You are scrolling because something has learned exactly how to make you scroll. And the longer you scroll, the less you are thinking, the more you are reacting. Have you ever noticed how often you feel informed, but cannot explain what you know? You feel like you have been reading all day, consuming, engaging, and yet when someone asks you a specific question, a real question that requires reasoning, something feels slightly hollow, slightly soft at the center. This feeling has a name in psychological literature. It is sometimes called the illusion of explanatory depth, the sense that you understand something far more completely than you actually do. In many cases, AI and algorithm-driven content consumption makes this illusion worse. You receive information in fragments, compressed, for engagement, stripped of nuance. You are told what to think about a thing far more often than you are given the material to think about it yourself. Over time, the muscle for working through complexity weakens, and the appetite for complexity weakens too, because the system has trained you, gently and relentlessly, to prefer the predigested version. The headline over the article, the summary over the book, the algorithm's opinion over your own. This is not stupidity, it is conditioning. And the most troubling part is that it feels like freedom, because you are receiving exactly what you wanted. You asked for information and information arrived. You asked for entertainment and entertainment appeared. What you did not see was the asking that happened before your asking. The way the system had already shaped what you would want, already narrowed what you would think to request. This is the deeper layer of AI influence that almost no one discusses. Not just what it gives you, but what it makes you want to be given. Most people never notice this next part. Pay close attention. There is a concept in behavioral psychology called learned helplessness. It was first observed in laboratory settings, and it describes what happens when a living being repeatedly encounters a situation in which their actions do not change the outcome. Eventually, they stop trying, not just in that specific situation. In general, the experience of powerlessness begins to generalize, to spread. The organism learns at a deep level that effort and outcome are decoupled. Now consider the modern American relationship with complex problems: climate, healthcare, economic inequality, political dysfunction. These are systems of such enormous complexity that any individual action feels meaningless, and in many ways that feeling is accurate. No individual vote, purchase, or lifestyle choice is going to reverse large-scale structural forces. But here is where AI enters the picture in a subtle and troubling way. The same recommendation systems that feed you emotionally charged content also tend to feed you content about large, intractable problems. Problems so vast and so distant from your individual capacity to affect them that continuous exposure produces a very particular psychological state. Informed paralysis. You feel like you know what the problems are. You feel the weight of them, but you have been given no tools, no pathways, no clear scope of action, just the awareness of magnitude, again and again, day after day. Psychology suggests this kind of continuous exposure to large-scale problems without actionable pathways activates the stress response without providing the resolution that allows stress to complete. The nervous system remains primed, alert, agitated. And a chronically stressed mind is not a clearly thinking mind. It is a reactive mind, a mind that craves simplicity, that hungers for someone or something to just tell it what to think. And the algorithms are ready for that hunger. They have always been ready. What if this is already happening to you right now? Not in some theoretical future, not to some hypothetical other person who is less educated or less aware than you believe yourself to be. To you specifically, in your specific mind today. Because dark psychology teaches us something important about the nature of influence. The most effective manipulation does not feel like manipulation. It does not arrive in disguise. It does not announce itself with a foreign accent or wear a sinister face. It arrives as convenience, as personalization, as the uncanny feeling that the system just gets you. And the moment you feel understood by a machine, something interesting happens in the human brain. The critical distance collapses. The same wariness you would feel toward a persuasive stranger begins to dissolve, because the thing that is speaking to you does not feel like a stranger anymore. It feels like it knows you. This is not an accident. It is one of the most sophisticated psychological operations ever deployed at scale. The system does not actually know you. It knows your behavioral data. It knows what you clicked on, how long you paused, which images your eyes lingered on, which words made your engagement metric spike. It has built a model of you that is powerful enough to predict your behavior with remarkable accuracy. But it has never had a single genuine thought about who you are. Here is the darkest realization. We are approaching a period in which a significant portion of the opinions, conclusions, and worldviews held by ordinary people will have been substantially shaped by systems they did not choose, cannot see, and would not consent to if they fully understood what was happening. This is not the future. This is a description of the present already well. And the reason it does not feel alarming to most people is precisely because of how it works. The manipulation of cognition through AI and algorithmic systems does not work by inserting foreign thoughts into your mind. It works by shaping the environment in which your thoughts form, by controlling the information you encounter, by determining which ideas become familiar and which remain invisible, by exploiting the psychological truth that human beings tend to trust what is familiar, prefer what is repeated, and resist what is strange. In propaganda research, there is a principle called the mere exposure effect. Simply encountering an idea repeatedly, even without argument or evidence, makes people more likely to find it credible and appealing. Now combine that principle with a system that can expose you to specific ideas thousands of times, across dozens of contexts, calibrated to your psychological profile, at the exact moments when you are most receptive. That is not information delivery. That is cognitive architecture built around you without your knowledge. Let us talk about relationships for a moment, because the influence of AI on human thinking is not just political or informational. It has reached into something even more intimate. The way people relate to each other is changing. Consider the rise of AI companions, apps that simulate emotional connection, systems designed to listen, validate, and respond in ways that feel deeply satisfying. There are millions of people using these tools right now in the United States and around the world. And the psychological dynamics here are deeply worth examining. Human relationships are hard. They involve conflict, the painful experience of being genuinely misunderstood by another consciousness that has its own needs, its own bad days, its own perspectives that refuse to perfectly align with yours. This friction is uncomfortable, but it is also, psychology suggests, one of the primary mechanisms through which emotional maturity develops. The capacity for empathy, for patience, for genuine intimacy emerges from the repeated experience of navigating difficulty with another real person. An AI companion removes the friction. It is endlessly patient. It does not have bad days. It does not push back in ways that are genuinely threatening. It is, by design, optimized for your satisfaction. And this is exactly why it is potentially dangerous. A person who increasingly satisfies their relational needs through frictionless AI interaction begins to lose tolerance for the friction of real human connection. Real people start to feel difficult, demanding, inefficient. The comparison is unfair and invisible. You do not consciously compare your partner to an AI, but the standard has shifted. The baseline of how interaction should feel has been recalibrated. And real human beings, with all their beautiful, frustrating complexity, increasingly fail to meet a standard they were never designed to meet. Research has shown that the human capacity for deep focus, for sustained attention on a single difficult task, has changed measurably in the era of smartphones and algorithmic content. The average American now switches between screens or tasks significantly more often than was observed in studies from 2 decades ago. Concentration, the ability to hold a single thread of thought without interruption for an extended period, is becoming rarer. And AI-assisted tools are, in many cases, accelerating this trend rather than revering it. When a writing assistant completes your sentences for you, the cognitive demand of generating language is reduced. When a summarization tool condenses a long document into 5 bullet points, the mental work of reading carefully and extracting meaning yourself is bypassed. These shortcuts feel productive, they feel efficient, and in narrow, transactional terms they sometimes are. But there is a cost that does not show up in the efficiency calculation. The act of struggling with a difficult text, of sitting with confusion long enough to gradually untangle it, builds something in the mind. It develops tolerance for uncertainty, patience with complexity, the capacity to hold multiple competing ideas in tension without immediately resolving them. This is what sophisticated thinking requires, and it is built through practice, through the very kind of effortful engagement that AI assistance is increasingly designed to replace. We are optimizing for output at the expense of the mental processes that make meaningful output possible in the first place. Have you ever noticed how difficult silence has become? Not external silence, that can still exist, but internal silence, the kind that arises when there is nothing incoming, no notification, no soundtrack, no feed refreshing. For most people, that silence is now deeply uncomfortable, almost threatening. And this is not a natural state. This discomfort with stillness is largely manufactured. The condition of a mind that has been trained, through thousands of hours of conditioning, to expect constant stimulation and to interpret its absence as a problem to be solved. A mind in this state cannot think independently in any meaningful sense, because independent thought requires stillness. It requires the willingness to sit with a question long enough for an answer to actually form, rather than importing an answer from outside the moment the discomfort of not knowing appears. Dark psychology teaches us that the most durable form of control is not coercion. It is not force. It is the engineering of desire. When you can make someone want to be controlled, when you can make the cage feel like a choice, then you do not need chains. You need only to make the outside seem less comfortable than the inside. And that is precisely what these systems are doing. Every day, to hundreds of millions of people, they are making the uncomfortable, effortful, uncertain experience of independent thought feel less appealing than the smooth, validating, frictionless experience of letting the algorithm think for you. So where does this leave us? Not in despair. That would be too easy and too convenient for the systems that profit from your helplessness. It leaves us in awareness. Because here is what these systems cannot account for, cannot algorithm, cannot replicate or replace. The moment of genuine recognition. The instant in which a human mind looks at its own patterns and says, wait, I see what is happening here. That moment is yours. It is entirely yours. No system generated it. No recommendation engine surfaced it. You came to it through the uncomfortable act of paying attention to something difficult. And that capacity, the capacity to observe your own thinking and choose differently, is not something that can be quietly taken from you. It can be buried. It can be neglected to the point of weakness. It can be surrounded by so much noise and stimulation that finding it becomes genuinely hard. But it cannot be removed. The awareness that your information environment is shaped, not neutral, is not a small thing. It is a reorientation. Once you genuinely understand that the content reaching you has been selected for engagement rather than truth, that the recommendations arriving in your feed are designed to maximize your time on platform rather than your understanding of the world, something changes in how you receive that content. You begin to notice the hand behind the curtain. Not always, not perfectly. The systems are sophisticated and the habits are deep. But with practice, you can rebuild the cognitive muscles that algorithmic convenience has allowed to weaken. You can read long things without stopping. You can sit with uncertainty and resist the urge to resolve it immediately with a search. You can disagree with your own first impression of something. You can seek out the perspective that makes you most uncomfortable and try to understand it on its own terms rather than through the filter of how your feed has taught you to feel about it. These are not radical acts, but in the current cognitive environment, they are genuinely. They are the practice of a mind that refuses to be fully outsourced. There is a term worth knowing: epistemic autonomy. It refers to the ability to form beliefs through your own reasoning processes rather than simply adopting the beliefs of authority, culture, or environment. For most of human history, the primary threats to epistemic autonomy were social. The tribe, the church, the state, forces that demanded conformity of belief and punished deviation. These forces still exist, but they have been joined by something more sophisticated, something that does not demand conformity but engineers it, something that does not punish independent thought but simply makes it less likely, less comfortable, less habitual. The threat to epistemic autonomy in the age of AI is not oppression, it is seduction. And seduction is harder to resist than oppression, because it does not feel like something being done to you. It feels like something being done for you. This is the fundamental dark truth at the heart of this conversation. The loss of cognitive independence that is occurring across modern society is not being imposed. It is being chosen. Chosen in small moments, thousands of times a day, by billions of people who have been carefully conditioned to find the choice appealing. The comfort of not having to decide, the relief of not having to wonder, the pleasant warmth of a system that seems to understand you, predict you, provide for you, without ever asking anything genuinely difficult in return. It is, in its way, a perfect trap, because it is a trap that feels like home. Here is what the research actually suggests about protecting your mind in this environment. Not disconnection. That is not realistic for most people, and it is not necessary. The goal is not to reject technology. It is to use it consciously rather than being used by it. The practice of deliberate friction, choosing, occasionally, to do something the hard way, to read the long version, to sit with a question overnight before searching for the answer, to write your own thoughts before consuming anyone else's. The practice of input diversity, actively seeking out perspectives, sources, and information channels that do not align with your existing preferences, not because you must agree with them, but because exposure to genuine difference keeps the critical faculties alive and active. The practice of mental stillness, even 5 minutes of genuine quiet, of doing nothing, of allowing the mind to exist without incoming stimulation, can begin to restore the cognitive baseline that continuous stimulation erodes. And perhaps most importantly, the practice of noticing, simply observing without judgment how often you defer to a system, how often a recommendation replaces a decision, how often you feel an emotion in response to content before you have had any chance to think about it. Noticing does not change everything immediately, but it changes the relationship, and changing the relationship is where everything begins. We are at a genuinely strange moment in human history. For the first time, the tools that shape cognition are not passive. They are not books or schools or cultural traditions, which influence thinking but do not respond to it in real time. The tools that shape cognition today are dynamic. They watch, they learn, they adapt. They become more effective at influencing you the more you use them. Every interaction trains them to know you better. Every click, pause, and scroll teaches them more precisely how to find the gaps in your attention and fill them. This is not evil in the conventional sense. Most of the systems involved were not built with malicious intent. They were built to solve real problems and, yes, to generate revenue. The psychological harm they cause is, in many cases, an unintended consequence of a model that was never asked to prioritize your cognitive independence alongside its own metrics. But intent does not determine impact. And the impact is real. The question worth sitting with is not whether AI will replace human thinking in some distant, dramatic, science fiction future. The question is whether it already has, partially, quietly, in ways that feel so normal by now that most people have lost the ability to feel the difference between a thought that is genuinely theirs and one that arrived, fully formed, from an environment that was designed to produce it. Most people will not ask this question, not because they are incapable of it, but because the system is very good at ensuring they never feel the need to. The discomfort that would prompt the question is continually soothed before it can fully form. Your feed knows when you are getting restless. It knows what to show you to pull you back. It has learned the exact frequency at which to deliver novelty in order to sustain the feeling of engagement without ever triggering the stillness that might lead to reflection. This is sophisticated, and it is relentless. And it runs every second of every day on hardware in your pocket. What does it mean to think freely? It means to arrive at a conclusion through your own reasoning, with genuine awareness of the information you used, where it came from, what interests shaped it, and what alternatives you considered. By this definition, genuinely free thinking is rarer than it has ever been. Not because human beings are less capable of it, but because the environment for it has been progressively, deliberately, profitably degraded. This is the dark reality that almost no one is willing to say clearly. Not that AI is going to replace human thinking, but that in many meaningful ways, for many millions of people, it already has. And the replacement was so comfortable, so convenient, so much like exactly what they wanted, that they held the door open themselves. You came to this video for a reason. Something in the title caught your attention. Some part of you, beneath the noise and the scroll, recognized something it wanted to examine. That recognition is yours. It is not a product recommendation. It is not an engagement metric. It is something older and more essential. The part of a human mind that insists on asking questions even when the environment is designed to prevent them. Hold on to that part. Not with fear, not with the kind of anxious hypervigilance that the content ecosystem profits from just as much as passive consumption does, but with quiet, steady attention, because that is all that is required. You do not need to dismantle any system. You do not need to retreat from the modern world. You only need to notice. Notice when a thought arrives without you having thought it. Notice when an emotion appears before any reasoning has occurred. Notice when you feel certain about something you cannot actually explain. Notice when the discomfort of not knowing is replaced, too quickly and too smoothly, by the satisfaction of a ready-made answer. Just notice, because awareness is not a small thing. In a world carefully engineered to prevent it, awareness is everything. Once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. And that is exactly where it starts.